I raised my son to be kind, respectful, thoughtful. Apparently, I forgot to raise him to be grateful. My name's Evelyn. I'm 63 years old, and up until recently, I lived in a cozy ground floor apartment in the same neighborhood I raised my children in. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. Warm walls, a little back garden I tended like a chapel, and neighbors I'd known since cassette tapes were still a thing. My husband passed 7 years ago, and since then, I've lived alone. Alone, but not lonely. I had my books, my church group, and my tea kettle that whistled like an old friend. I also had my son, Mark, who, despite being in his 30s, often seemed to think he still needed parenting. Or worse, entitlement, disguised as parenting. Mark married Jenna 3 years ago. She's sharp. And by sharp, I don't mean clever. I mean the kind of sharp that cuts you when you weren't even aware there was a blade around. Everything was beneath her. My cooking, my furniture, even the scent of lavender in my guest room gave her allergies. They lived in a small townhouse across town that Jenna constantly complained about. Too cramped, too far from the city, too old. And over the past year, I noticed Mark echoing her words more and more. It's funny how fast a grown man can become a mouthpiece when someone else holds the remote to his ego. Then, about 6 months ago, Mark started making comments. Mom, your place would be perfect for us once you move on to something smaller. Or, you don't need a backyard anymore, do you? Or the one that really stuck in my chest like a thorn, you've had your time with the house. It's our turn now. I brushed them off, thinking, he's joking, just tired, just parroting Jenna's wishes. But then came the real kicker. One afternoon, he stopped by with takeout and a folder full of printed real estate listings. Look, he said, laying them out on my coffee table like a game of Monopoly. There's a beautiful condo on Main Street. 2 beds, no stairs, closer to the bus stop. Might be time for a change, don't you think? I looked at him for a long time. Mark, are you suggesting I move out of my home so you and Jenna can move in? He gave me that sheepish grin he used to flash when he stole cookies as a boy. It just makes sense. You don't need all this space, and Jenna's pregnant. That part hit me like a piano dropped from a rooftop. You're having a baby? I wasn't even told. Yes, he said quickly, and we want to raise the baby somewhere peaceful. Not in a 2-bedroom with paper-thin walls. We need a proper home. So let me get this straight. I raise a son, keep a warm home, survive widowhood, and now, at 63, I'm being displaced for someone else's nursery plans? And they didn't even ask. They came with plans. I told him I'd think about it. He seemed pleased enough, said they'd start packing just in case. But what he didn't know, what he could never guess, was that I'd already been thinking of selling. Not for him, not for Jenna, for me. I'd quietly been talking to a real estate agent about a cozy 2-bedroom condo near the lake. No yard to maintain, a quiet library nearby, and best of all, peace. No guilt trips, no entitlement, no lavender-induced allergies. So when Mark called again 2 weeks later to check in and mention they'd rented a moving truck for the following Saturday, I smiled. Oh, I said, that's nice. And that Saturday, they arrived. All right. Mark in his baseball cap, Jenna in oversized sunglasses and a smug little smirk. Behind them, a U-Haul parked like a bulldozer in my driveway. But I was ready, waiting. Right there at the edge of the driveway, holding a bright red sold sign in one hand and the keys to my new condo in the other. And the look on their faces? Well, let's just say I almost felt bad. Almost. Mark slammed the car door with the kind of force that tells you someone's pride has been bruised. Jenna stayed in the passenger seat, arms folded, sunglasses still on, even though the sun was ducking behind clouds. The moving truck idled like a hungry animal behind them, completely out of place in my little driveway. I stood there, steady, the sold sign tucked proudly under my arm, and my new condo keys looped through my fingers like jewelry. Mark stormed toward me, eyebrows raised in disbelief, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Mom," he barked, lowering his voice as he approached. What is this?" I smiled softly. "Exactly what it looks like." "But you didn't tell me you sold the place." "You didn't ask if you could move in," I replied. He blinked like I'd slapped him. Behind him, Jenna finally opened her door and stepped out in her chunky white sneakers and tight expression. She surveyed the scene like a home inspector with a grudge. "I don't understand," she said, pulling her coat tighter. "We arranged everything." "No," I said, turning to face her squarely. "You assumed everything." Mark ran a hand over his face and looked at the U-Haul like it was now radioactive. "Where are we supposed to go?" I shrugged, not to be cruel, but because I was genuinely done carrying the weight of their poor decisions. Jenna scoffed, clearly unable to grasp the idea that I wasn't going to just hand over my home like it was a party favor. "You knew we were coming. You could have told us before we spent all that money on the truck and boxes." "I could have," I said. "But then maybe you would have finally learned to ask instead of assume." Truth was, I hadn't planned on telling them at all that day. Not until I saw the truck pull up with all that nerve and entitlement rattling inside. I hadn't signed anything yet. But that sight, that moment, it sealed it. The final nudge. I hadn't expected it to sting as much as it did, seeing Mark that way, his mouth slack, his eyes darting, his ego trying to reassemble itself. But I also hadn't expected him to forget I was a person. Not a placeholder for his convenience. Not a sacrifice for his next phase of life. "Why now?" he asked quietly. "Why sell now?" I took a deep breath. Because I'm 63. I don't want to spend the rest of my years walking on eggshells every time Jenna thinks I leave too many shoes by the door or use outdated Tupperware. I want quiet mornings. I want a place where the silence isn't judgmental. And most of all, I want to make choices for myself again. Jenna muttered something under her breath and turned toward the truck, probably texting someone about her evil mother-in-law. I didn't care. I'd given her years of courtesy she hadn't earned. I was done. "I'll come by next week to get the rest of my things," I told Mark gently. "The buyer's giving me until the end of the month." He just stood there, stunned. And I swear, in that moment, I saw my little boy, the one who used to hand me dandelions like they were treasure. But that little boy grew up, married someone who saw me as a stepping stone, and let himself become a bulldozer. "I hope the baby brings you joy," I said, "more than space ever could." Then I turned around, walked to my car, and drove to my new condo, where sunlight streamed through wide windows. The doorman greeted me by name, and peace didn't feel like something I had to apologize for. And in the rearview mirror, my old house got smaller, but somehow I felt bigger than I had in years. You'd think that'd be the end of it, right? I sold the house. They drove off. I moved into my little condo where the neighbors say good morning and nobody slams doors. But oh no, that was just the start. 3 days after I moved in, I got a text. Not a call, a text. From Jenna, of course. "Hope you're settling in. Quick question. Can we at least have the bedroom set? We figured you wouldn't need it in a smaller place." I stared at the message like it was written in another language. No, please. No, would you mind? Just, can we have your bed? And I swear, in that moment, I laughed so hard I nearly choked on my tea. I didn't reply, not because I was trying to be petty, but because I knew what this was. It wasn't about a bed. It was about control, about marking territory. Jenna was trying to take pieces of my old life like they were up for grabs, like I was some moving antique store. The next morning, Mark showed up. No warning, no call, just buzzed the lobby intercom like he was delivering pizza. I let him in. He walked into my condo like it was unfamiliar territory, looking around, touching things, clearly trying to make sense of the fact that I was really gone from the house, that I wasn't sitting upstairs like I always had, that I wasn't waiting. Mom, he said, rubbing the back of his neck, this place is nice. Thank you, I said. There was this weird silence, you know the kind, where someone isn't really there to visit, they're just building up to a request. And sure enough, he dropped it. Look, Jenna's under a lot of pressure with the baby coming. She thought it would help if she could feel like we had a fresh start. Somewhere safe. Familiar. He looked at me. You don't think you could maybe undo the sale? Or talk to the buyer? Maybe buy it back? Now listen, I've heard some wild things in my time. But this one? Undo the sale? I almost checked to make sure he didn't have a fever. Mark, I said, let me ask you something. He nodded. If I'd told you 2 months ago that I was thinking of downsizing and asked for your input, what would you have said? He blinked. I don't know. Maybe that it was a big change, that I could help with the process. I nodded. That's what a good son would say. Then I looked him dead in the eyes. But instead, you pulled up with a moving truck like I was a tenant with a deadline, like I was a spare part you were coming to replace. He went quiet. And I could see it, right there on his face. That moment where he realized this wasn't just about a house. This was about respect. About how many times I'd swallowed my needs to make his life easier. About how little thought he'd given to what I wanted, what I needed, what I'd earned. I'm not angry, I told him. I'm tired. I gave you all I could, and now I just want a little peace. Not out of spite, but out of survival. He didn't have anything to say to that. He just nodded, got up, walked to the door. Before he left, he turned and said, You really like it here, huh? I smiled. I love it. He hesitated just for a second, and then he said, All right, take care of yourself, Mom. And you know what? That was the first time in a long time it felt like he meant it. It had been almost 2 months since that day in my condo, since Mark walked out with more silence than words, and Jenna hadn't said a single thing since. No thank you, no apology, no update. Which, honestly, I didn't mind. Peace and quiet had become my new best friend. But something was shifting. You know how you can just feel it when something's coming? Not bad. Just something. I was sipping tea by my balcony one morning when I got a call from an unknown number. Almost let it ring out. But curiosity got the better of me. Hello? And there it was, Mark's voice, hesitant, tired. Hi, Mom. She's in labor. Baby's coming early. I blinked. Right now? Yeah, we're at the hospital. I know it's sudden, but would you come? Now here's the thing. That man had said a lot of things over the past few months. But would you come? That was new. Wow, that was different. And just like that, I found myself pulling on a sweater and calling a cab. I didn't go because I owed him anything. I went because I remembered what it felt like to hold him for the first time. To be scared and excited and not know what the future held. I went because, for all the things he got wrong lately, he was still my boy. When I got to the hospital, he was pacing the hallway, hair messy, shirt half tucked, just like when he was 10 and forgot his school project. "Thank you for coming," he said. And then, something I didn't expect. He hugged me. Fully. Like he meant it. I walked into the room where Jenna lay, pale and exhausted. She didn't speak, just stared at me for a long moment. And then she whispered, "I'm scared." And suddenly, all the bitterness, all the snide comments, and the cold shoulders, they didn't matter. Not right now. Because in that moment, she wasn't Jenna, the difficult daughter-in-law. She was just a young woman about to become a mother. So I sat beside her. I held her hand. I did what women have done for each other for generations. I showed up. The baby came that evening. A little girl with lungs like a trumpet and cheeks that could melt the hardest heart. They named her Lena, after my mother. And when they placed her in my arms, Lord, my whole chest cracked open. That little girl didn't care who owned what house, or who said what. She just needed love, and I had it to give. 2 weeks after baby Lena was born, Mark stopped by my condo. No warning, just a knock. I opened the door and saw him standing there with a paper bag in one hand and that unreadable expression he wore whenever he didn't know how to start a conversation. "I brought pastries," he said flatly. I stepped aside. "You can come in." He sat down on the couch like it was foreign territory, like he didn't quite know if he belonged there. I poured some tea. He didn't touch the pastries. "I've been thinking," he said after a long silence, "about the apartment, about everything." I nodded slowly. "Me too." He didn't look at me, just stared into his cup like it had answers. "You blindsided me, Mom, selling it like that." "And you showed up with a moving truck without asking," I said gently, not harshly, just truthfully. He let out a dry laugh. "Touché." We both sat in it for a moment, everything unspoken piling up between us. "I guess I thought," he finally said, "that after everything you did for me growing up, the least you'd do was make room for my family." "I thought the least you'd do was ask," I replied. More silence, and then I took a breath. "Mark, I've always put you first. Every decision, since you were born, was about you. Even when your dad passed and it felt like the floor dropped out from under me, I stayed strong because you needed me to." He nodded, still not meeting my eyes. "But now I'm older. I don't get do-overs. I needed to do this. For me. I wasn't trying to punish you or Jenna. I just needed to feel like a whole person again. Not just mom or grandma or landlord. Just Mabel." He finally looked at me then, and I could see it in his face. He understood. He didn't like it, but he understood. "I get it," he said slowly. "But you have to understand, too, I'm not just your son anymore. I'm a husband, a father. I can't always put you first. Lena comes first now. Jenna comes first." "I know," I said quietly. "That's how it's supposed to be." We sat in that new truth. It didn't sting. Not really. It just settled into the space between us like a shift in weather. "I'm not mad anymore," he said, "but I guess I'm still adjusting." "That's fair," I said. "So am I." He stood, brushing imaginary lint off his jeans. "Well, I should go. Jenna's mom is visiting, and Lena's got this cry that sounds like a tiny, angry goat." I laughed. "She gets that from your side." That cracked a smile out of him. He paused at the door. "Thanks for the tea. Thanks for the pastries." And just before he left, he turned and said, "I may not like everything you did, Mom, but I get it. I really do." And then he was gone. Not with a hug, not with sweeping music or dramatic goodbyes, just gone. And I stood there in the doorway for a while, holding my cup, feeling everything and nothing all at once. But one thing I knew for sure, this time I chose myself. And for once in my life, I didn't feel guilty about it.